All right, today we are diving deep into a fascinating book by Adrian Whitlock called A History of Fraud. And what's so great about it is how it shows that really, deception is one of humanity's oldest pastimes. We're going to explore how the cons we see today are more often than not just old schemes dressed up in new clothes.
The book kicks off with this quote, and it just nails it. See, fraud isn't about violence or brute force. It's all about persuasion. The con artist's greatest weapon isn't a crowbar. It's their ability to manipulate our trust. They don't break in. They get invited in, probably after charming you at the front door.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the book's core message. The technology gets an upgrade, but the fundamental scam, it stays exactly the same. You know that email you get about a Nigerian prince needing help with his fortune? Well, that's just the 21st century version of the Spanish prisoner letter, a scam that's been making the rounds for over 400 years. The only thing that's really changed is the delivery method. So what's their secret? How have fraudsters been so successful for so long? Well, the book argues it's not about inventing brand new tricks. It's about mastering a timeless art form. Every single fraud, from the ancient world to your spam folder, is built on exploiting just a few core parts of our own psychology. You know, fraudsters are basically amateur psychologists, and they are really good at their job. They dangle something we want, money, love, success, and then they just let our own hope and greed do most of the heavy lifting. They create this false sense of urgency, right? Because they know if we feel rushed, we're way more likely to make a bad decision. They don't just sell a product, they sell a feeling, they sell hope. To really understand how this playbook was written, the book takes us way, way back. We're talking ancient Greece and Rome, where some of the very first scams were being cooked up, right alongside the invention of things like money and contracts. So let's talk about a guy named Hegestratos, a Greek sea merchant from around 300 BC. He pulled off one of the first recorded cases of insurance fraud. His plan was pretty simple, actually. Get paid for his cargo of corn twice. It was a classic move, totally depending on the lender trusting that he was on the level. The only problem, his own crew figured out he was planning to sink the ship with them on it. In the end, he was the one who ended up jumping overboard. But hey, it wasn't just individuals. Even the state got in on the action. The book points to Roman emperors like Nero, who would debase the currency. What does that mean? They just mixed cheaper metals like copper in with the silver in their coins, but pretend they were still worth the same. This was fraud on a massive scale, using the ultimate authority, the government, to basically print money out of thin air, which, surprise, surprise, led to runaway inflation. Now, as we move forward in history, the book shows us how fraud started to get more sophisticated. It began to exploit more abstract ideas of value, things like forged documents that could grant someone an empire, or the crazy speculation that fueled the first stock markets. Just look at these two examples, 1,000 years apart. The donation of Constantine was one of the most successful forgeries in all of history, used for centuries to justify political power. Then, a whole millennium later, you have the South Sea Bubble, which used nothing but hype and promises to create a massive financial frenzy over a company that was basically worthless. Both were frauds built entirely on paper promises. I mean, the South Sea Bubble was pure, unadulterated madness. The share price rocketed from about £128 in January to over 1,000 by August. This was a textbook example of exploiting mass hope and creating social proof. Everybody was doing it, so it had to be a good idea, right? People from every walk of life, from dukes to their butlers, were borrowing money they didn't have to buy in. And then the crash. It was as swift as it was brutal. By the end of that same year, the stock had plummeted, losing nearly 90% of its value. Thousands of people were completely ruined, and the entire British economy was on the brink of collapse. It was really the first great scandal of modern capitalism. This quote really drives home one of the book's most important points. Anyone can be a victim. You're looking at a quote from Sir Isaac Newton, literally one of the most brilliant minds in human history. And he lost a fortune, £20,000, which is millions in today's money, in the South Sea Bubble. He actually sold early and made a profit, but then he got sucked back in by the hype. Even a genius couldn't resist the madness of the crowd. Okay, let's jump forward to the 20th century. This is where the book introduces us to what it calls the democratization of fraud. A new kind of charismatic con artist emerged, targeting the life savings of the growing middle class on an almost industrial scale. And the undisputed king of this era was, of course, Charles Ponzi. Now, he didn't actually invent the scheme, but he pulled it off with such style that it's been named after him ever since. His promise of a 50% return in just 45 days was a masterclass in exploited optimism. He created this incredible sense of urgency. Get in now, or you'll miss out forever. But underneath it all, it was just robbing Peter to pay Paul. So, how did this massive house of cards finally come tumbling down? The answer is simple arithmetic. See, Ponzi's cover story was that he was making money from something called international reply coupons. But a journalist named Clarence Barron actually did the math. To make the returns Ponzi was promising, he would have needed about 160 million of these coupons. The problem? As you can see, there were only about 27,000 of them in circulation in the entire world. The whole thing was a mathematical impossibility. And that brings us to the modern day. As the book concludes, the stage has changed dramatically. We've moved from town squares and stock exchanges to the internet. But the actors and the script they're using, it all feels remarkably familiar. The book's final chapters are just filled with modern cons. But here's the thing. Whether it's a phishing email trying to get your bank password, a crypto scam promising impossible returns, or a huge Silicon Valley company like Theranos that was built on a complete lie, the core deception is identical. They're all exploiting our desire for a shortcut, our trust in authority, and that powerful fear of missing out. The tools are new, but the playbook is ancient. And so the book leaves us with this one big, unsettling question. If history teaches us anything, it's that our own ingenuity is matched only by our capacity for deception. The story of fraud isn't over. It's being written right now, one lie at a time. So what do you think the next chapter holds?